Welcome to The Coach Within. I'm your host, Coach Jedi, a podcast where transformation begins from the inside out. Here, we explore coaching conversations that unlock clarity, spark insight, and bring you closer to your purpose. Whether you're a coach, a leader, or someone on the journey of personal growth, you're in the right place. Each episode brings real stories, practical tools, and thought-provoking reflections to help you thrive in life, leadership, relationships, and dreams. Let's journey inward, ignite the coach within, and brave your story.
Coaching Mastery Series, Ethics, Boundaries, and Core Competencies for Mastering Coaching. So I always say that, when we start mastery, we don't end in mastery. We begin in mastery, we continue mastery, and we journey all the way through the mastery. Mastery is not an endpoint, but it's an ongoing journey. And one of the key tenets of mastery, it's ethics. And oftentimes many coaches or many leaders and many individuals who are learning coaching or any other professional support professions as well, they tend to avoid ethics because they think, I know about ethics. I know what's right, what's wrong. But understanding ethics in the context of the profession, it's going to be critical. So this ethics we're talking about, it's not the generic ethics of Kantian ethics, deontology, or teleology, or other forms of ethics, but we're going to look at it specifically to the profession of coaching. So this is only something going to be really, really important for us to dive in deeper. Okay. So the code of ethics in this whole process, we're going to look at it's a few different slices. For this particular session, we're going to look at the first slice, which is on the core competence, which is on the code of ethics, the general principles of ethics. Okay. Now, let's go in and let's ask the first question. What is ethics to all of us? So this is our very opening question. What do you think is ethics, especially in the coaching context?
Confidentiality.
Okay, so we have the word confidentiality. Anything else that comes to mind when you think of ethics?
Professional conduct.
Okay, so there's another sense of professional conduct. Okay, and anything else that comes to mind?
Ethics is really, in my opinion, doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
Okay, so we have this thing, doing the right thing when no one is looking. Okay, so we hear some of these keywords like professional conduct, confidentiality, doing the right thing when no one's looking. But how do we know what is the right thing to do when nobody's looking? And how do we know that that is applicable to the clients as well? What do you think?
I thought value system is something that you can't really dictate, but it's supposed to be quite personal. But I thought human beings generally have a agreed set of value systems that we agree is correct, like honesty, integrity, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. A common set of beliefs.
Yeah.
Okay. Then they agree. So do you all agree on this statement that it means every human being have a common set of belief that we all agree to? That means no beating another person, no abusing another person, no scolding another person for no reason. Is that a common set of belief?
The least is common. Whether you adhere to them is another question. I mean, I was thinking the least as in generally people do agree those are the things that you should do and not do. And you should do them even when no one is looking. Yeah.
Okay. So notice there's this word here, generally. Right. And however, we're coming from the lens of a more developed country or nation. And as such, we have been socialized to the education system, that this is something that we are kind of used to, right, or that we should expect. Right. So we kind of socialize to this that, because everybody is generally like this, so we should be doing like this. But if you think about this, generally comes from the place of more developed, educated society. And we're talking about in terms of the second class or the societies that are developing as well as they have certain bases of education. But if we look at other communities, villages, and maybe more rural regions where they don't have access to general societal norms, now ethics then become a question, because now we begin to see that ethics are not just general to everybody, but they're only general to a group of individuals with shared something. Okay, so this something can be our shared core as a nation, a shared education system, a shared traditional values, construct, religious beliefs, whichever it is. So if we are from a different continent, different country, then the shared common beliefs will be different. Right? So if we go back 5,000 years ago, maybe in Singapore, there probably wasn't any people, or not much people, maybe animals and some Sang Nila Utama and all the other people that may be there. But most people will not have existed, or the modern people have existed. So the only people they kind of trusted were the villagers or the village head. So whatever the village believed, then that were the set of common ethical things that they agree on. So we begin to see that ethics are something that is general to a group that we can come to agreement on, generally speaking. And that's where ICF also came together and say, okay, we need to have a set of ethics that transcends countries, boundaries, cultures, whether it's Eastern culture, Western culture, Asian culture, Central culture, or Polynesian culture. We want to find something that upholds the ethics of the profession. So we begin to see that there's this idea of ethics in the profession. Okay, but there's also another kind of ethics in the workplace. So this is where we call organizational ethics. For example, in the organization, we are it's an unspoken rule, or maybe everybody knows it, that we're not supposed to steal from the organization. But do we all believe that? I think I really believe that. Okay, what are common things that people tend to steal in the organization? Something that we all steal. Almost everyone steals something, steal a common thing in the organization. What do you think that is?
Pen and paper.
Pen and paper and electricity, right? We charge our phones from the... So actually, charging your phones in the organization is stealing, because the power supply is not paid by you, it's paid by the organization. Unless the organization has an explicit clause to say you're allowed to charge X amount of wattage per month, right? But that itself is stealing. Stealing a pen is also stealing. Stealing a piece of paper, or a marker is also stealing, right? And or excessive use of the toilet is also stealing. Or filling water and then bring the water home, it's also stealing. But yet something happens here. We define that as not really stealing. Right? So somehow we say that those are not stealing. Those are okay stealing. But yet, if I steal a printer, I bring home a printer from the office, then that is major stealing. So now we have faced a conundrum, which is what is considered stealing and what is not stealing. Because if stealing means everything is stealing. So we are as much guilty as a person who maybe steal millions of dollars versus we just took a piece of paper from the office, right? Because it's the same. It's both stealing. But why is it that we are so afraid to say that's stealing? Well, because there's another layer that comes into play, which is the degree of consequence of the action. So now we see this idea coming up, right? I put this down. So the degree of consequence of an action. So an action is classified as good, not good, or consequential, not consequential, or impactful, not impactful, based on that action or the behavior. So in the organization, because phones don't last a whole day, and the organization expects you to use your phone, so they're not going to say, you stole X amount of power from the office today, right? They're also not going to say, you took a piece of paper from the office today, because those are common resources the organization expects you to use judiciously, which means there's a certain level of expectation for that. So that is a certain ethics that bounds the organization. But there's also an implied, which is the degree of consequence of an action. Now, all these things are going to be important as we discuss in terms of coaching, because there are degrees of consequence based on whatever we do. We can technically do anything. but to what degree? So, for example, some coaches tell me, "Oh, Jedi, can I do a visualization exercise with the client, or can I use a personality tool with a client? Can I tell the client to use a assessment tool? Can I use this framework, that framework?" So you notice that a lot of this question comes down to the point of, can I steal 2 pieces of paper, 5 pieces of paper, 1 ream of paper, right? That was kind of question. So that's why it's going to be important for us to also consider this thing called the degree of consequence of an action. Now, we've covered earlier about ethics in profession, which is, in this case, we're looking at the coaching profession. We could have different professions, right? So you have coaching, you may have mentoring, you may have other things. So whatever those professionals are, those are different layers that you can layer on. Yeah. Now, there's also another one. Beyond the scope of the workplace, there is what we call ethics in the society, or societal ethics. And sometimes we can call this community ethics as well, depending on how strong a country is or a nation is. Some countries, they are very strong in community, which means that in my set of community, we hold a certain level of ethics. In another set of community, they hold a certain ethical norm or commonality that they all agree on. Okay? Now, beyond that, what do you think is beyond the ethics of a society?
Sorry, Janet, before that, I just want to clarify what you said just now about stealing 2 pieces of paper in the coaching context, right? So what you're referring to is actually the use of, for example, copyright material, whether you, let's say, do a personality test without paying for the profile, things like that, right? You're referring to that?
Yep, and also using a personality test with the client.
With the client?
Yeah, with the client.
But if it's legal, I mean, if you paid for it?
Even if it's legal. Because so that's where the ethics come in, because it sounds like nothing wrong with just use a personality assessment, just like taking a piece of paper and pen from the office. But when we think about it from an ethical standpoint, does the client really need a personality assessment? Or is it because it's easy, convenient for us, and then we just give the client, please do the assessment?
So it's more from wanting to make money out of the client, is it?
Not just the money, but also, are you using the tool with the intent to simplify things for you? Or are you using the tool with the intent to categorize the client into a certain framework or certain box or certain color or certain profile?
So in a case where I genuinely believe this personality tool is going to help the client, surely that's considered ethical, right?
That's not ethical as well.
That's not ethical.
Because it's coming from your perspective that it's going to help the client.
But if he decides it's going to help him?
Then that's a different story. So you notice ethics is 2 parts, right? One is you as the one who's giver, and then the other one who's the one receiver. So that's why we have this thing called the coaching agreement, which is the initial setting of the entire contracting, where you ask the clients, hey, what are your thoughts around personality assessment? If a client believes that personality assessment is a lot of pseudoscience, which it is. So research has shown that personality assessments are pseudoscience. And why is it so popular? Because people are lazy to find out who they are for themselves. They rather use a certain classification of terms or colors or things to categorize themselves in the boxes. Is it useful from an organization standpoint? Yes, because it's very efficient. I categorize everybody into different boxes. But from an individual standpoint, is it useful? No, because then the individual loses who they are. So in the initial setting of the coaching agreement, that's when you discuss with the client what will make most sense for you. So if the client is the organization got no time to have 10,000 people, everybody individually figure out who they are. So they need to use a certain tool to maximize the efficiency. But the consequence of that is that the fidelity of that personality or the assessment tool may not give you the richness of your people's who they are, who they really are. So there's companies to be complain. They say, but this person is like this profile. Why can't they do it? Yeah, because they over rely on the tool. So our role then as coaches is, because we are familiar, we understand the consequence of that, we have to let the client know what are some consequences. If the client so choose to continue with it, then we go with where the client wants to be, as long as within the ethical boundaries.
Okay, Ken, thanks.
Yeah, that's why even for paper and pen as well. You notice that if the company say, "Oh, Chris, just go ahead lah," right? You just take all the paper that you want, because if you take paper, right, make sure you post on TikTok. They say this is a company branded paper. Go for it, right? So of course, some companies will be more than happy for organizations or for individuals to take home the items. Let's say if I'm a beverage company, I want you to take home our beverages, right? Because it's also branding for me, for my company. So this is something to think about, where ethics is not just from one direction, but also the receiver and on the other side. Okay. So that's a good question. Okay, good. What do you think? So as we go into this, we talk a little about the ethics at different levels, right? So we have the profession, we have the workplace, the organization, and then we have society as well, and community. Anything else that you feel is beyond that? Well, there's nothing beyond society. Or there is ethics in the culture, right? So this culture, we talk about different regions. We can look at it from a locality or country or people. I will just put peoples, okay? For a reason that sometimes peoples are spread across different countries, but they all share a common culture. Or sometimes a group of people come to a particular country, and now that country, it's multicultural and they own that country's culture. So I give you an example. In Singapore, it's a kind of like a hodgepodge or a rojak or a little hot pot of mixture of different cultures. But the Singaporean core as the culture, people say, oh, we are a Singaporean core. We have a Singaporean culture, regardless of race and religion, and that's built into the local culture. In other localities, the culture is spread across their own individual community identity. So it's interwoven that goes beyond the societal impact, right? So from a society standpoint, there's a certain way. From a cultural standpoint, there's a different layer, which transcends across different cultures. For example, if you go to Japan, what's the difference in what you observe in Japan as compared to your own countries? Okay, so we see a certain level of discipline, right? In the SAF, right? We also think, oh, discipline should be very high, but there, discipline is on another level. It's to the second. When the train comes, it really comes, and I love the Google Maps there, because whatever the time the Google Maps say, it's almost 100% correct. They will tell you which cabin of the train to go, come out from which cabin, exit from which door. In Singapore, when I open my Google Maps, sometimes it just tells me wrong things. The train is not functioning, it doesn't update as quickly. So you notice that from that societal standpoint, something transcends. And if I meet a Japanese individual from Japan, but not based in Japan, but in a different country, they also possess the very same ethical relations that they have, they bring out, right? And you see that culture brought across outside of just their country to themselves. So that's where we see ethics as a culture. It permeates across different regions. Yeah. And beyond that, is there something beyond ethics in culture? Ethics in the world. Okay. So we can look at it from a global humanistic standpoint. The general consensus, so that's where Chris brought out, like, generally people know not to kill. Okay. But that is common, not common amongst all people on planet Earth. That is common among most people, but not all people on Earth, where it's okay not to kill another human being. In the past, if we go back like a few thousand years ago, was it okay to kill another human being? Yes, it was. It was ethically permissible. It's great to do that, right? Because that was a period of time of command and conquer, and you have a lot of empires taking over another empire. And so at that point of time, there's a lot of slavery, a lot of consequential killings. But at that point of time, those people living during that period of time, it was ethically okay. But today, if you do that, harm another human being, it's seen very, very poorly in the world. And so that's where we see what we call not just the world, but what we call time. Right? So ethics in time, which is in this generation or this season, what is known, what is acceptable, what is okay. And why do we use the word time? Because in this generation now we are also facing another new era. Or maybe let me put the word era as well. The new era of technology or AI, and the future beyond AI, which will be aliens. I don't know, right? Maybe. Right? So we in the past we used to say, "Oh, computers is going to take over people." Now we say AI. Then maybe in future some organic matter that's going to come. We do not know what it is, but now with a new era that's stepping in, technology, AI, it's going to transcend the entire world. So then there's another argument of ethics with technology or with AI or with machine learning in the future of what that looks like for us. So then we begin to see, wow, in the ethical consideration, there are so many different layers. And that's where it's going to be even more challenging for you, because when you look at the questions that's going to come up, the questions may test you across different layers. And so understanding these different layers helps us to better answer the questions, right? Or answer the ethical dilemma questions that we may face when we're engaging our clients or coaching. Now, if we go back to this, if we look at it from a concentric circle, so at the professional level, at the profession of the coaching, and then at the workplace, organization, societal, cultural, and then at the world level, if we were to go deeper, is there zero? What is smaller than the profession?
The person?
So there's the person. Okay, I gave the clue. That's not the P, right? So the person. This is your individual ethics, really, right? Ethics, and then we can call it morality. We can call it beliefs. We can call it values. Okay. So here we will not debate between ethics and morals. That will be for another class. We have a whole 1-year program of ethics where we explore deontology, teleology, and all the other ethics. But you notice at the core level is you as an individual. What seems permissible at the ICF level, at the professional level, may not be permissible at your own individual level. So ultimately, the guiding principle will be you as an individual, which is even if the ICF doesn't say it explicitly clear, but you hold the last line of boundary, and this is what ICF calls the do good principle, which is ultimately when you're faced with a yes to do this, not to do this situation, it is the ethics at the individual level of doing good for another person that we consider. So not what I feel is good for the other person, but is it really helping the other person? Yeah. So now we see person, profession, workplace, societal, culture, and as a whole nation, or as the whole world at the global level, and across time and space as well. Okay. So these are the different considerations as we think about. So when we use the ICF Code of Ethics, where is it? It's found here, right? At this level, ICF Code of Ethics. Okay. And the norms are found at that level. Okay. Beyond that level, that's where we have our personal beliefs, ethics, and everything that complies to that. Okay, good. Any questions here so far? Okay. So why then we talk about this ethics at the start? Because this sets the boundaries of what we can do or what we should not do. It also influences when you're listening to the client. If the client says, "Oh, coach, today I'd like to talk about how to make money," then as we listen to that, we could ask ourselves, is that something that can be done in the coaching session? Or if the client says, "Hey, coach, I'd like to talk about how to get away with murder." And then when we hear something like this, we say, "Oh my goodness, wow, I must call the police." But before we jump too far, then we ask the client, "Hey, client, can you tell me more? What exactly do you mean?" "Oh, coach, recently I was watching this Netflix series called How to Get Away with Murder, and I was intrigued by the character build-up and the storyline. And I'm just wondering how I can write beautiful screenplays like that." Okay, so notice, so we also have to be mindful of words that may trigger us. So without that clarity, we have to be mindful what are we aware of or what are we not aware of. And that's why to kickstart all those things, later I'll be sharing with you a framework for you to navigate all those things more effectively, right? Because now we're beginning to see, wow, certain words trigger us, certain words don't trigger us. Certain words make us feel like, oh, no, we cannot do that. But whatever it is, we first have to gain clarity about what the client really means. But we also have to be aware of how we are impacted or influenced by those words and things said by the client. Okay, good. So, as we go deeper, what we're going to look at is, over the next 6 series, we're going to look at the different layers of this contents. In the first 2 series, which is today and the next session, we're going to look at the first domain, which is coaching ethics, which forms 30% of the entire exam core. The next 2 series, which we're going to look at, is the definition and boundaries of coaching. And the third part, or the last 2 series, we'll look at the coaching competencies, strategies, and techniques that will form the 40%. Okay, so you find that the exam will be challenging for different people at the different stages, and ethics take up 60%, essentially 60% of the entire thing. Right? So the first 30% is general, the next 30% is really the boundaries. Okay, so we're going to look at, in this first 2 sessions, what is the domain of ethics. We're going to look at the professional knowledge of ethics, the code of ethics. The second one, what constitutes conflict of interest. And the third, relevant laws, regulations, organizational policies, procedures around confidentiality. So I highlighted those keywords here because those words will definitely come out in your exam, right? Things like confidentiality. What are the factors that would break confidentiality, that you need to break confidentiality? Conflict of interest. When is it good to have conflict of interest? When is it not good to have it? Or how do we know it's conflict of interest? For example, this time I think Chris brought up the idea of personality assessment. How do I know it's a conflict? Right? Even if it's a paid, even if I'm licensed to it, can I just do it? Right? So when would it be a conflict of interest? And also ethical codes. So these are things we can cover in these 2 sessions for today and the next session. Okay, good. So I like to start with this. The ethics isn't where coaching ends, but it's where it begins. Very much like a tree. So I was just asking, if we can visualize what the ethics really is all about, how do we visualize that? And so one idea was that it's like what can be seen and what can't be seen. Very much like a tree. You can see the tree, but you cannot see the essence of the tree, how the tree grows. But you can see it slowly grow. But we cannot see it growing in that moment because it takes time. So our eyes sometimes cannot see what other organs or senses can see. So in the very same way, once we're very clear about the boundaries of ethics, then in answering the questions, it becomes second nature. It's going to be very easy. It's almost second nature, just reading it and understanding it.
Thank you for tuning in to The Coach Within. If today's episode sparked something in you, take a moment to reflect, journal, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Want to experience coaching or explore our upcoming programs? Head to jedi.coach or check out our show notes to connect. If this podcast helped you to grow, please follow, share, and leave a review. It helps more people to find us. And until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep braving your story from within.